The wind howled through the halls of Riverrun, rattling the old stone windows as if mourning a death not yet avenged. Robb Stark stood alone in the chamber once reserved for his war councils, but tonight, no plans were drawn. No advisors spoke. There were no maps, no tokens, no banners spread across the table. Only silence. Heavy, punishing silence. It had been 2 weeks since the Raven arrived. 2 weeks since Maester Luwin handed him the scroll sealed with the sigil of the crown. Robb didn't need to break it open to know what it said, he had already felt it in his bones, the moment the sky darkened over the camp and the wind grew still. He read it anyway. Lord Eddard Stark, Hand of the King, has been executed for treason. Long live King Joffrey. The words burned more than they should have. Not because they were lies, though they were, but because they were written with such indifference. No honor, no remorse, no sense of weight. As if the life of the man who raised kings and taught lords could be reduced to a sentence in a raven scroll. At first, Robb didn't speak. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He only nodded, took the letter, and left. That night, Catelyn found him standing in the rain, sword in hand, eyes distant. "What are you thinking, Robb?" she asked gently. His answer came hours later, whispered to the cold night air. Honor got him killed. In the days that followed, a shift began to settle into the young wolf. Where once there was patience, there was now fire. Where once he waited to hear the counsel of bannermen and lords, he now gave commands without hesitation. He ordered the ravens to be sent. No more talks. No more treaties. They would march. Not just on behalf of the North. Not just for justice. But for vengeance. Lord Karstark was the first to notice the change. "He's colder now," he whispered to Greatjon Umber. "It's not just grief. Something broke in him." "Maybe that's what we need," Umber replied grimly. "A Stark who'll finish the fight, not one who'll die honorable like a fool." That night, Robb summoned his lords to the chamber. "I no longer fight for peace," he said, voice like ice on steel. "I fight for retribution. We will burn a path through the Riverlands, through the Westerlands, and we will not stop until Joffrey Baratheon's head is mounted on a spike." Whispers followed, uncertain but excited. This was not the young, noble Robb they'd known, the boy who paused before battle to ask what was right. This Robb wore armor like a second skin, eyes sharp with fury. The shadow of Ned Stark no longer guided his blade. Even Catelyn noticed it, and feared it. "You speak like Tywin Lannister," she told him one morning. "Then maybe that's what it takes to beat Tywin Lannister," Robb answered coldly. But deep down, behind all that fire and fury, Robb was a son mourning a father, a son who had been taught all his life that honor was everything, only to watch honor lead a man he loved straight to the executioner's blade. The betrayal wasn't just Joffrey's. It was the world's. A world that laughed at truth. A court that spat on honor. A crown that rewarded cruelty and mocked loyalty. Robb didn't just want vengeance anymore. He wanted to undo the lie that was King's Landing. He wanted to drag every last Lannister into the mud, to make them feel the cold that had now settled inside his chest like winter never left. As the banners of the North were raised, and the drums of war echoed once more through the Riverlands, the boy king of Winterfell was gone. In his place stood a wolf cloaked in blood and fury, one who had finally learned what the game truly was. And this time, he wouldn't play it with honor. The march south was unlike anything the Riverlands had seen since Robert's rebellion. But this time, there were no songs, no banners fluttering in the wind with pride. The direwolf of House Stark flew high, but its edges were scorched and torn, a silent symbol of the rage that boiled behind the eyes of its young lord. Robb Stark didn't ride at the front anymore. He didn't wave to the small folk who peered through their broken shutters. He barely spoke, except when issuing orders. His dire wolf, Grey Wind, stayed close now, more protective, more restless, as if sensing that his master had changed. Robb had tasted the lie of honor, and now he spat it out like bitter wine. The first town they came upon flying Lannister red was small, barely a dot on the map, just a cluster of thatched roofs and frightened peasants. A Lannister garrison of 15 men had taken shelter there, claiming supplies, taking what they pleased, abusing the women, and burning what they couldn't eat. In the past, Robb would have sent a warning. Offered a chance to surrender. He might have spared the town, punished the guilty, and shown the kind of mercy his father was known for. But not now. Robb gave no warning. The entire company moved in at dusk. Silent. Precise. Efficient. The screams didn't last long, a few minutes at most. By the time the fires settled, the Lannister soldiers were nothing more than ash and broken bone. No trials. No negotiations. Only consequences. Some of his bannermen cheered. Others exchanged nervous glances. They had never seen the young wolf show such cruelty, such coldness. But none dared question him. Not yet. The next day, Robb gave orders to burn the remaining food stores. "They'll learn what it means to fly red in the Riverlands," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But my lord," said Ser Edmure Tully, finally daring to speak. "The small folk served Lannisters willingly," Robb snapped. "If they feared us more, they would have resisted." The room fell quiet. No one spoke against him again. That night, Catelyn came to his tent, alone. "Robb," she said, "you're not your father. You don't need to lose yourself to win this war." "I'm not trying to be my father anymore," he said without looking at her. "Being him got him killed." She placed a hand on his shoulder, but he shrugged it off. "I watched men mock him in the streets," Robb continued, bitterness rising in his throat. "I heard how they cheered when Joffrey raised his head on a spike. Do you know what it does to a man, to see the world celebrate the death of someone so good?" "He died with dignity," Catelyn said softly. "Dignity doesn't raise armies," Robb answered. "Dignity doesn't scare kings." His mother's eyes filled with pain, but she said nothing more. She left him alone in the tent, surrounded by war maps and vengeance. The news of Robb's new brutality spread quickly. Villages began surrendering before his banners arrived. Lannister scouts avoided his path. His army grew not because of honor, but because of fear. But with fear came whispers. Some said the young wolf no longer prayed. That he had stopped speaking to the old gods altogether. Others claimed Grey Wind had tasted too much blood, and that his master was becoming just as wild. There were even talks that Robb had started executing his own men for desertion without trial, a rumor that wasn't entirely untrue. In truth, Robb was tired of waiting. Waiting for peace, for talks, for some distant justice that would never come unless he made it himself. He had come to learn that honor was a currency that only worked in stories and songs. In war, it was a liability. And he no longer had the luxury of being weak. But with every town he burned, every Lannister soldier hung, a question gnawed deeper inside him, not one he'd ever speak aloud, not even to his mother. Would his father be proud? Or horrified? It didn't matter. The man who could answer that question was dead. And Robb Stark had no time for ghosts. As the army reached the borders of the Westerlands, a new plan was already forming in Robb's mind, one that would strike at the very heart of House Lannister. Not with honor. But with fire, steel, and no mercy. Because in this game, only monsters survived. And Robb Stark had finally decided he would become one. The sun bled over the hills like a wound refusing to close. Robb Stark stood atop a ridge, eyes fixed on the distant golden towers of Ashmark, a minor Lannister stronghold, well defended but lightly garrisoned. It wasn't just a castle. It was a symbol, prideful, polished, and untouched by the war's ugliness. That was about to change. He turned to Lord Bolton, who waited beside him in silence, eyes as pale as a winter moon. "How many inside?" Robb asked. 300, perhaps less," Bolton answered. Half of them green boys. The rest, seasoned, but arrogant. And the gates? Strong, Bolton said, but not invincible. Especially if we don't knock. Robb gave a cold nod. We don't knock. The plan was simple, brutal, but effective. No drawn-out siege. No parley. No warning. They would strike at night, using hidden paths Bolton's scouts uncovered. The attack would be swift and merciless. This wasn't the Robb who once sent ravens ahead to negotiate surrender. This was a wolf hunting in silence. That night, as the moon disappeared behind clouds and the wind turned cold, the north descended on Ashmark like a ghost in the dark. No horns were blown. No banners were raised. Only fur. Bolton's flayed men took the western walls first, slaughtering the guards in their sleep. Grey wind was loosed through the main yard, a silent blur of teeth and rage. Stark soldiers poured in through hidden tunnels, cutting down surprised defenders before they could reach their swords. The screams didn't last long. By dawn, Ashmark was ash. Robb walked through the smoking ruins with a hard expression. The Lord of Ashmark had tried to flee with his family, only to be dragged back to the main hall by Bolton's men. His wife sobbed. His daughter clung to her mother. But Robb didn't blink. You served the Lannisters, he said flatly. I had no choice, the Lord shouted, blood on his lips. We were sworn. And now you'll die for it. He didn't hesitate. He gave the order. The man was executed on the spot. His family spared, barely, and only because Catelyn had insisted. Slaughtering children isn't vengeance, she hissed at Robb later that night. It's madness. I didn't kill them, he replied. That's mercy enough. She looked at him like she didn't recognize him anymore. And maybe she didn't. That evening, Lord Bolton approached Robb privately. Your enemies are beginning to understand, he said with a thin smile. They're learning to fear you. Good, Robb muttered, not looking at him. Fear lasts longer than respect. Bolton studied him quietly. You know, Your Grace, he said, voice low, honor didn't just get your father killed. It's the same poison that weakens every great house. If you purge yourself of it completely, you'll be unstoppable. Robb didn't answer. Not then. But the words stayed with him. He began listening more closely to Bolton's counsel, a dangerous man, yes, but an effective one. His methods were cruel, even disgusting, but they worked. And right now, Robb didn't need pretty victories. He needed fear. Blood. Power. The Westerlands began to panic. Small Lannister outposts fled before Robb arrived. Word spread that the young wolf no longer fought for justice, but domination. His rage was unpredictable. His mercy extinct. But the price of such fury was starting to show. Lord Rickard Karstark, once one of Robb's most loyal supporters, approached him after Ashmark. This isn't justice, he said. This is butchery. They butchered my father, Robb replied coldly. Now they'll feel it in their bones. Karstark shook his head. Your father was a man people followed because they believed in him. What do they believe in now? Robb stared at him, jaw clenched. They believe I'll win. And for now, that was enough. But as the war raged on and Robb's name spread like wildfire, the line between leader and tyrant began to blur. His victories were swift and brutal, but not without cost. Each town he razed, each prisoner he refused to spare, each Lannister banner he tore down without mercy, it all chipped away at something inside him. Once, he had dreams of peace. Of ruling the North with fairness and strength. Of restoring honor to House Stark. Now, he only dreamed of burning King's Landing to the ground, of walking into the Red Keep with his sword wet and his enemies kneeling. He saw Joffrey on his knees. He saw Cersei begging. He saw Tywin dead at his feet. But in none of those dreams did his father appear. Because he knew Ned Stark wouldn't be proud of what he was becoming. But it didn't matter anymore. Ned was dead. And honor had died with him. The snow began to fall earlier than expected. Not the gentle kind they saw in Winterfell during the first frost, this was thick, heavy, unrelenting. The Riverlands groaned under the weight of ice and war, and Robb Stark's army kept moving, even as their boots sank into slush and their tempers shortened. No songs were sung around the campfires anymore. There was no laughter, no stories of home. The men followed their king not because they loved him, but because he made their enemies bleed. It was a loyalty forged in fire, but brittle all the same. Inside Robb's war tent, the maps were covered with fresh ink and bloodstains. Lord Roose Bolton leaned over the table, pointing at a river crossing just east of Lannisport. "If we strike here," Bolton said, "we cut off their food supply. Half their troops are wintering near the coast. Isolated. Weak." Robb didn't respond immediately. His eyes were focused on another marker, a small Lannister-held estate deeper west. Not strategic. Not significant. But it bore a name he hadn't forgotten, Craighall. "That house," Robb said suddenly. "They laughed at my father's death. The Lord toasted Joffrey in front of the entire Westerlands court." Bolton's gaze narrowed. "Then we burn them next." Robb nodded. It was no longer about winning the war. Not fully. It had become personal. Every castle, every bannerman, every sigil that had once bowed to Tywin Lannister, they were guilty by association. There was no gray in Robb Stark's world anymore. Only traitors and the dead. Catelyn watched from a distance, horrified by what her son was becoming. Her grief for Ned had never gone away, but this? This cold-eyed boy in her husband's armor. This was not the son she raised in Winterfell's courtyards. She confronted him again. "Robb," she said one night, her voice heavy with worry, "you are turning the North into something your father never wanted." He didn't even look up from his maps. Father's dreams died the moment Joffrey raised that sword. "And what of your dreams?" she asked. "Do you plan to rule a kingdom soaked in blood and ash?" "I plan to rule a kingdom where no one ever dares raise a sword against a Stark again." "And what kind of man will that make you?" He finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, not just from war, but from the constant battle in his own heart. A survivor. That was the last time they spoke like mother and son. From then on, she became another advisor at the edge of the tent, offering counsel he rarely listened to. Soon after, a message arrived from the twins. Lord Walder Frey, bitter and insulted, reminded Robb of his broken promise to marry one of his daughters. The old man's tone was venomous, the kind of slight that would have once made Robb pause. "Consider diplomacy." "But not anymore." "I'm not writing to the twins like a boy begging forgiveness," Robb said as he tossed the letter into the fire. "He wants war. He'll get it." "My lord," said the Blackfish cautiously, "Frey holds the river. He could cut us off from the north." "Then I'll take his river from him," Robb snapped. Brick by brick. The council fell silent. Each day, Robb grew more alone in his choices. Fewer questioned him, not because they agreed, but because they feared being next. Even Grey Wind had grown more aggressive, snarling at men who once shared meat with him around the fire. It was as if the wolf was feeding off his master's darkness, or maybe reflecting it. That night, Robb stood outside his tent, staring at the stars. For a moment, he thought of Arya, of Sansa, even Bran and Rickon. Scattered, lost. All of them. A family broken by a crown that had laughed as it killed their father. He clenched his fists. If he had to burn the 7 kingdoms to the ground to rebuild House Stark's name, so be it. There would be no more bending knees. No more honor codes. The North would remember not because of mercy, but because of what he was about to become. Not a boy. Not a hero. A conqueror. The attack on Crakehall came like a nightmare. No warnings, no messengers, no terms of surrender. The Northmen arrived under the cover of a storm, rain pounding the ground so hard it masked the gallop of horses and the footsteps of killers. Robb led the charge himself, grey wind at his side, his blade striking without hesitation. The defenders were outnumbered, unprepared. By the time they realized what was happening, the gates were already open and the fires already lit. Screams echoed through the stone halls, bouncing off the cold walls like the final prayers of a cursed house. Crakehall was left in ruins. Its lord was dragged before Robb, bloody, beaten, begging. The man offered his gold, his fealty, even his sons as wards. Robb didn't listen. "You toasted the boy king who murdered my father," Robb said, eyes locked on the trembling old man. "You smiled while Winterfell mourned. I was forced. No one is forced to laugh." And with that, Robb gave the order. He didn't flinch when grey wine tore the man's throat out. He didn't blink as the soldiers looted the castle and brought the Frey prisoners out from the dungeons, men who had been held there for sport. One of them, a young Frey knight with a missing ear, fell to his knees. "You're not the man they said you were." "No," Robb said, turning away, "I'm not." Back at camp, the mood was split. Some of the northern lords saw strength in the brutality. Others saw a growing shadow that reminded them more of the Lannisters than of any Stark. But no one dared speak it aloud. Only Lady Catelyn came to him again, her face pale, her voice shaking. "You've gone too far this time," she said. "They deserved it. So now you're judge, jury, and executioner. You think that's what your father wanted?" Robb stared at her, jaw clenched. "I don't care what he wanted. He's dead. And he got that way by believing people like them would play fair." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "He died because he was better than them. Because someone had to be." "I'm not better," Robb said quietly. "I'm alive." And that was the end of it. The Crakehall attack shook the realm. Rumors twisted into legends before the blood had even dried. Some claimed Robb had burned the children alive. Others whispered that he let Bolton flay prisoners on the battlements. Most weren't true. But Robb no longer cared to correct them. Let them fear him. Let them tell stories that kept lords awake at night. He wasn't trying to win hearts, he was trying to break the enemy's will. And it worked. Word reached him days later that Lord Gawen Westerling had withdrawn his men from a key garrison near Case. Small folk abandoned their homes in Lannister territory, terrified that the young wolf would come next. Even the Westerlands' banner men, once proud and untouchable, began whispering of surrender. But victory came with a cost. His army was stretched thin. Supplies were running low. Winter was closing in. And worst of all, the very allies he relied on were starting to fracture. Lord Rickard Karstark had lost 2 sons in a previous raid. He had grown bitter, erratic. He wanted blood, but not just Lannister blood, he wanted vengeance for his own losses. When Robb refused to let him attack prisoners without trial, Karstark called him a hypocrite. "You burn castles and slaughter men in their beds, but I can't kill a few boys in chains." Robb's answer came cold and final. "You disobey me again, and I'll have your head, noble blood or not." That night, Karstark stormed out of camp with half his men. The army, once unified under grief and vengeance, was beginning to crack under the weight of what Robb had become. Even the soldiers whispered when they thought he wasn't listening. "Does he even remember what we're fighting for? Did he ever?" But Robb heard. He always heard. And the worst part? He wasn't sure he had the answer anymore. At first, it was for justice. Then for vengeance. Then to send a message. But now it felt like he was marching just to keep moving. Because if he stopped, if he let himself feel the weight of everything, his father's death, his family's ruin, the man he used to be, it would all come crashing down. So he kept going. One step. One sword stroke. One ruin at a time. Because turning back meant admitting he'd gone too far. And Robb Stark was too far gone to turn back now. The wind was sharper in the west. It came off the mountains like a blade, slicing through tents, biting through armor. Robb Stark didn't feel it anymore. Not really. Cold had become something distant to him, like kindness, or grief. Something he used to notice, but now only remembered. They had taken 3 more keeps in a fortnight, none with names worth remembering, none with resistance strong enough to slow them. The war was no longer a matter of strategy. It was a slow, relentless crushing of anything bearing the lion's red and gold. But even as Robb's banner rose higher across the Westerlands, his own alliances were beginning to rot. The desertion of Lord Karstark had shaken the camp more than Robb wanted to admit. Half the men who followed Karstark were bloodbound to families in the north. Brothers, cousins, uncles. And though they feared Robb, fear did not fill bellies or warm bones during winter nights. Tension brewed in every campfire conversation. "Is this still Ned Stark's war?" one man whispered. "No," another answered. "This is Robb's wrath now." Even Lord Bolton, whose own house was built on cruelty, began to show signs of concern. "The men are restless," Bolton said one evening. "Victory doesn't hold them like it used to. Not without coin. Or purpose." "They have purpose," Robb replied, eyes on the map. "The war's not over." "No," Bolton said slowly, "but your enemies are bleeding faster than your allies can keep pace. They followed the young wolf. They may not follow a king of ashes." Robb looked up, the flicker of firelight dancing in his eyes. "Then let them leave. I'll finish this without them." Bolton gave a small, cold smile. "You might." But even Roose Bolton, whose loyalty was always measured in shadows, began sending ravens behind Robb's back, letters sealed with wax the Stark boy never saw. Catelyn, still clinging to the last fraying strands of her son's soul, tried once more to reach him. She brought him a letter, one smuggled from the Vale. It spoke of Sansa. Alive. Imprisoned in King's Landing. A piece of hope. "She's still your sister," Catelyn said, voice trembling. "If we could reach her." Robb shook his head. "We don't negotiate with the filth who killed father." "She's not them, Robb." "No," he said, jaw tight. "But she's their hostage. And I won't be held at blade point by a crown that dances on my family's graves." Catelyn didn't cry this time. She only looked at him, long and sad, before turning away. "You're losing yourself," she said quietly. "And you don't even care." She was wrong. He did care. But every time he remembered his father kneeling before Joffrey, every time he saw that blade fall in his mind again, and again, he buried the feeling deeper. Because feeling didn't win wars. It only delayed them. And Robb Stark was done with delay. One night, as they camped near the ruins of a pillaged Lannister village, a raven came bearing a message: Tywin Lannister was moving west. Robb smiled for the first time in weeks. "Good," he said. "Let him come." The old lion was finally taking him seriously. It was the battle Robb had longed for, not against children or cowards, but against the beast who bred them. The man who had orchestrated Ned Stark's downfall. The architect of pain. Robb began preparing for the confrontation. Every soldier was summoned. Every blade sharpened. He sent no scouts. No spies. He wanted Tywin to see him coming. To feel it in the ground. In the air. But something strange happened. As the army moved into position, they came upon a burned village not of their doing. No Lannister soldiers. No signs of battle. Just smoke. And bodies. Dozens of them. Northern men. Flayed. Robb's blood froze. Roose Bolton's sigil, the flayed man, had been carved into the wooden gates. At first, Robb thought it was a warning from Tywin. A mockery. A taunt. But the more he stared, the more something inside him began to unravel. Was this Bolton's doing? Had he gone rogue? Or had Robb, by turning a blind eye to Bolton's cruelty for so long, given permission without ever saying the words? His own men, his own people, butchered like cattle. And he hadn't even noticed they were missing. That night, Robb didn't sleep. He stood outside, cloak heavy with frost, staring into the flames, hearing again what his mother had said. "You're losing yourself." He realized something he hadn't allowed himself to think until now. He might have already lost. Morning came gray and bitter. The snow hadn't stopped. It fell in lazy, heavy flakes that blanketed the ruined village, half burying the flayed corpses. Robb Stark stood in the center of it all, face unreadable, the silence around him as heavy as the cold. The flayed men had been scouts. His own. Sent to monitor Tywin's movements days earlier. Now, they hung without names, stripped of skin, nailed to wooden posts like cattle. The stench of burnt flesh mixed with the freezing air, turning the entire camp sick. Robb's hands were clenched at his sides. Roose Bolton approached, slow and calm as always, his expression untouched by the horror. "You know who did this," Robb said without turning. Bolton tilted his head. "Do I?" Robb finally faced him. "Your sigil was carved into the gate. Your signature. This was your message." "A message," Bolton replied smoothly, "can be forged. Painted. Anyone can draw a flayed man, my king." Robb stepped closer. But only one man would take pride in it. For the first time, Bolton's eyes flickered. Not with fear, he didn't know the feeling, but with calculation. "I have done nothing you didn't already permit," Bolton said. "You wanted fear. You wanted the West to tremble. I only gave them a reason." Robb's jaw tightened. "You butchered my own men." "They were already dead when we arrived," Bolton lied, just enough truth beneath the words to blur the line. "But if they were traitors, deserters, would it matter? You said yourself, only loyalty matters now." Robb didn't respond. He wanted to strike him, gods, he wanted to tear Bolton apart, but some dark part of him hesitated. Because Bolton was right about one thing. Robb had allowed this war to rot. He had let the rules fall away, piece by piece. At first, for vengeance. Then for victory. Now. Even he wasn't sure what the end looked like anymore. By the end of the day, the bodies were buried. No songs. No rites. Just silence and snow. That night, Robb summoned his bannermen. The tent was quiet when he entered, his armor still stained with soot and ash from the village. "I know what's being said," he began. "That I've changed. That I've become something else. Maybe I have." He looked around the table, eyes locking on each of their faces, Blackfish, Great John, Galbart Glover, even Roose Bolton, who stood calmly at the back. "But I will not be remembered as the boy who let Tywin Lannister outplay him. I will not crawl home with my father's name smeared in mud and blood." A murmur ran through the room, low and uneasy. "You follow me," Robb continued, "not because I am kind. Or just. Or even right. You follow me because I have done what had to be done. Things my father would never do." He looked down, a long pause stretching the room thin. "And maybe that means I am no longer my father's son." The words hit like a hammer, even to himself. But no one challenged him. They all knew it was true. "I will finish this war," Robb said. "But when it ends, we will not be remembered as the Northmen who marched with broken hearts. We will be remembered as the storm that drowned the lion's roar." Outside, the wind howled like a warning. In the days that followed, Robb began making plans to meet Tywin head-on. No more ambushes. No more shadow games. He would bring every soldier, every sword he could muster. One final battle, not for peace, but for dominance. But before they could move, a raven came. The twins. Lord Walder Frey had responded. The message was brief. We remember broken oaths. You were promised to us. There will be a price. Robb crumpled the parchment without a word. We ride soon, he told his captains. Let Frey name his price. You don't think it's a trap? Blackfish asked. They can try, Robb said coldly, but they'll find the young wolf doesn't beg twice. Catelyn, upon hearing the plan, begged him to reconsider. Their phrase, she said. They don't forgive. They don't forget. Neither do I, Robb replied. And they'll learn that if they cross me, they'll bleed like Lannisters. She stared at him, haunted. You sound like a tyrant. He said nothing. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew she was right. And he didn't care. The banners of House Stark rolled toward the twins beneath a sky the color of iron. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though no rain fell. Robb Stark led the host at the front, his direwolf padding silently beside him, muzzle stained with dried blood. Behind him marched 5,000 men, the last true army of the North. But what once marched with pride now moved in eerie silence. The men weren't cheering. They weren't singing. Their boots struck the mud like hammers, grim and heavy. They had seen too much, done too much. And though they still followed Robb, the truth was beginning to settle in their bones like winter. They had traded their honor for fire. Their glory for ash. And they were about to pay for it. The twins loomed ahead, cold, ugly, and unforgiving. Walder Frey's castle was never meant to be a home. It was a warning. Two towers guarding a single crossing, narrow and ruthless. There was only one way in. And only one way out. Robb knew it. And still, he rode forward. He didn't smile when Walder Frey greeted him with that crooked, toad-like smirk. Didn't flinch when the old man pretended to welcome him with flattery soaked in venom. My Lord King, Frey said, bowing mockingly, you honor us with your presence. Robb nodded. Let's not pretend you're glad to see me. Walder's smile twitched. Then let's not pretend you didn't break your word to me. You want payment? Robb said. Name it. Frey glanced at his daughters. You'll marry one. Robb didn't hesitate. Fine. Even his own men flinched at how easily the words came. Just like that. Lord Umber muttered later. No hesitation. No illusions, Robb replied. This is war. We pay what we owe. They celebrated the union that night in the main hall, if celebration was the right word. The music was shrill. The food was tasteless. The wine tasted like old dirt. Robb sat stiffly beside his new bride, a girl with downcast eyes and trembling hands. His mother watched from across the hall, her face tight with worry. Something was wrong. She felt it in her chest. The air was too still. The guards too tense. The doors, closed. Barred. The musician's eyes never left the corners of the room. She leaned toward Roose Bolton, who stood by the dais in his quiet, unreadable way. Why are you wearing armor under your cloak? She asked softly. Bolton didn't answer. Then the music changed. It was a different song. One that didn't belong at a wedding. The Rains of Castamere. Catelyn's blood turned to ice. She turned just in time to see a man draw a blade. Robb never reached for his sword. The first bolt struck him in the shoulder. The second in his leg. Grey wind howled in the distance, from outside, locked in the kennels. Trapped. Screaming. Robb tried to rise, but another bolt hit him in the gut, and he dropped to his knees. Around him, his men were cut down, some at the tables, others at the doors. Blood poured over the stone floor like spilled wine. Laughter echoed from the frays, their knives slick, their eyes wild. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Catelyn screamed, not words, just sound, as she grabbed a knife from the table and pressed it to a fry girl's throat. "Let him go," she cried. "Let him go or I'll." But Walder Frye only smiled. "I'll find another." Roose Bolton stepped forward, face as calm as ever. He looked down at Robb, the boy who had trusted him, followed his advice, let him in close. "The Lannisters send their regards," he said. Then he plunged the dagger into Robb's heart. Robb didn't scream. He just looked up. Eyes wide. As if for the first time, he truly saw where the road of vengeance had led. No glory. No throne. No justice. Just a cold floor and betrayal. Catelyn's scream followed him into the silence as she cut the girl's throat, and seconds later, a fry blade opened hers. The hall fell still. No one cheered. No one wept. Only blood. Only silence. When the news reached the north, it broke them. Not because their king had died, but because the boy they once followed had long been gone. Robb Stark had turned his back on honor. And in doing so, he'd led them into darkness. Not every wolf dies in battle. Some are just hunted down. And some, like Robb Stark, are lost the moment they forget who they were.